And with that, I would like to introduce Kim Ryan, Kristen Hardy, Martha Kovack, and Curt Shoultz for their presentation entitled Piloting the Kritik Platform, Faculty and Student Perspectives.
Thank you. Welcome. So today, the four of us are going to talk about our experiences trying out a peer assessment platform called Kritik. And just a disclaimer, none of us work for Kritik. I don't even believe any of us own stock in Kritik. We're just people who are interested in trying out this technology in our courses. So Kritik is a peer-to-peer learning and evaluation platform. It's a web-based platform that's designed to assist students with further development of critical thinking skills. And to do that, it draws on Bloom's taxonomy. And many of you will probably be somewhat familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. It's usually represented as a pyramid with more basic learning objectives on the bottom, like committing knowledge to memory, and higher order skills like evaluating ideas and views based on evidence located at the top. In Kritik, you as the instructor provide a rubric for each peer-to-peer learning and evaluation activity. The rubric specifies the criteria for peer review and evaluation, and students can also use this as a frame of reference for completing their own work. So each activity in Kritik has 3 stages. The first is a create stage. So students create their own submissions based on your instructions, as they would for any sort of traditional classroom assignment. Secondly, they evaluate papers by their peers or submissions by their peers. They score them using the rubric, and they provide brief written comments. Now, all of this is anonymous between the students who are evaluating and students who are being evaluated. It's not anonymous to you as an instructor, but it is among the students using the system. And thirdly, there's a feedback stage. And in this stage, students provide anonymous feedback to the evaluators as to how helpful, how useful they found their comments. They use the categories that Kritik has decided on, motivational and critical, to rate those comments that their peers have provided. And then the overall activity grade is based on a combination of those 3 stages in a ratio that's determined by you as the instructor. Next slide, please. Thanks. So among the 4 of us, here are the courses in which we've used Kritik. I used it in 2 of my courses at the University of Winnipeg. One was a disability studies course where I used it twice, and the other was a religion course. Martha used it in her BU education course, Introduction to English Language Arts Methods, the early years. Curt used it in his BU education course, Teaching Reading, Thinking, and Study Skills. And Kim used it in her BU Psychiatric nursing courses, Introduction to Interpersonal Communication and Philosophical Perspectives for Practice. So while these don't represent the full range of types of courses that our respective universities offer, they do represent some diversity, including the level of the courses, which ranged from introductory to 500 level. Thanks. So I'm going to start by talking about my use of Kritik in my Disabilities, Sexualities, and Rights course, where I've now used it twice. This is a 2nd-year course at the U of W. It's cross-listed with both disability studies and women's and gender studies. It doesn't have specific course prerequisites. It typically has an enrollment of about 35 students, and I offer it using a combination of required asynchronous and optional synchronous components. I primarily used Kritik for a weekly written response activity, which is described here. Students received 42% of their overall course grade based on the highest 7 marks out of up to 9 weekly submissions. Now, especially given that peer-to-peer evaluation is a new skill set for most students, I set up the weighting within each activity to strongly favor the student's own writing work. So they got 75% of their mark on each of these assignments from their own written work. And these were 300 to 350 word responses to writing prompts that were included at the end of each weekly lecture video. In the evaluation stage, for which students received 20% of their mark on this activity, students were asked to anonymously assess and comment on 3 papers. Now, the number of papers can be set by the instructor. Kritik recommends a minimum of 3, just so each student gets a diversity of evaluations and feedback on their work, but you can set as many as you like. And finally, or pardon me, so for this stage, each student was evaluating 3 papers. They were rating them on 3 rubric criteria, which I'll return to in a moment, and they offered a couple of comments on each, and they can offer more comments if they wish. Some like to do more detailed feedback about particular aspects of the writing, for example. Others like to make more general comments. They're not required to make extensive comments. And then finally, I gave students a 48-hour window for this stage. And then finally, they had a 24-hour window for their final stage, which is a quick task. They need to read the feedback comments that they received, and they rate how motivational and how critical they found them. Now that's only worth 5% of their overall mark, which for an assignment worth 6% of the course grade is not a lot, but it was just enough that most diligent students would take the few moments they needed to complete that task. So the evaluation portion of students' marks was based on a 50-50 combination of how closely their assessments matched those of other students who were evaluating the same paper, or how closely they matched my own evaluation if I stepped in to override the peer assessments on a particular paper, which I sometimes did. And the other 50% from how useful the students whose work was being evaluated found their evaluators' comments to be. So in my course, we used a weekly critic cycle for these assignments, which began at 8 a.m. on Sunday when the lecture videos became available, which contained those writing prompts. And the cycle concluded at 10 p.m. on Thursdays when their feedback was due on their peers' comments on their papers. But the dates and times are entirely up to the instructor. So you can use this for assignments which take place over a longer portion of the term, and you can completely adjust which dates and times you want each of these stages to occur at. Next slide, please. Thanks. The rubric that I designed for this activity works on a 1-to-4 rating system for each of 3 criteria, and the 3 criteria were engagement with course materials, concepts and ideas, critical thinking and insight, and the clarity and mechanics of the writing itself. So students have an interface which shows them a row of, in this case, 4 stars, and they click on them with their evaluation for each criterion. They can also give half stars. The rubric explains in detail the sort of things that a paper meeting each level should exhibit, and then they can also use those half stars if they feel that the work falls in between those levels. Instructors can design their own rubrics, as I did here, including the relative weighting of each criterion, or they can also use one of Critic's pre-designed rubrics if they find one that fits their needs. And Critic has a fairly big selection of options depending on the type of assignment that you're using. Next slide, please. So a survey was made available to students by Critic at the end of the term. Unfortunately, only one of my students completed this after the fall term. And their comments included that they believed they got slightly lower grades from their peers than they would have from me, and I don't necessarily agree with that, but that was their perception. They did appreciate reading the comments that others had made on their work, but they didn't like what they felt was the limitations of the star system and wanted more options, even though with the half stars, they actually have 8 levels altogether to use for each criterion for each paper. Now I'll turn things over to Martha to discuss her use of Critic.
Thank you. So that was great, Kristen, and you explained a lot of what I think is similar for all of us. So I'll just say that my assignment was different. So I teach early years English language arts methods, and one of the assignments that I always do is have the students do a series of storytellings, 3 storytellings that they have to do, where they read aloud a book. They have to choose high quality literature, use, create a stimulating environment by using storytelling techniques, and they have to engage students in conversation. So with online learning, they had to make a video, and they would hold up their book, make a video, and that is what the creation stage was for my students, was that they created a video. So this is kind of unique in that it wasn't a paper they submitted, it was a video. It's also unique in that it wasn't anonymous, because obviously you can see who's in the video. So it wasn't very anonymous, but the person evaluating was anonymous, like they didn't know who was evaluating them. So the creation stage was, for me, the creation stage was creating these rubrics. So you'll see here, we call it interactive storytelling. There were 3 of them. And there was a test one, and that was really important to do the test one so that if there were stresses or stressors, it wasn't for marks. So everybody could just get used to using the system. So that was really helpful. So you can see here that I've done, rated it by quality literature. Did they use diversity, the storyline? How was their storytelling technique? And then it was just weighted by points. And then you can see right there what the rubric looked like. And all of this was done with the Kritik support team. So that person helped me every step of the way. That person helped me set up the rubrics, figure out, and even had super feedback for me in terms of what would be unique in terms of that this was a video assignment. And she was just available all the time. We met regularly to set this up. It was a lot of support. And it took a little bit of getting used to, but I think in the end, it was well worth it. And of course, I wouldn't need to go through that every year. It was just a new learning curve. So, so the creation stage for the students, though, was to create their video, and they uploaded that a link to the video. They can't upload the video directly. There wasn't enough bandwidth or whatever it is that they have to upload. They had to upload just a link, so their video would be on YouTube. And then the students would be randomly assigned, as Kristen was saying, to view whatever 3 to 5 videos that came up. I had a really small class in the fall, so it wasn't a lot that happened, but we did have each person evaluate at least 2, and I think it was 3 storytellings. It would have been better even more. But I've done this before, not online, and I just find the peer evaluation, and they're also supposed to evaluate their own videos. And I just find that's where they learn the most, is watching other people. Oh, that's what it's supposed to look like. Oh, that, yeah, I like the whole peer evaluation right from the start. And then this just made it really a lot easier. The evaluation stage. So then, yeah, they evaluated 3 to 5 videos. Some people did not submit their videos in time, and there were problems with due dates because I'm in Ontario, so there was a time shift problem. So you can flip to the next slide just for a change of view here, just to see the other things that they were evaluated on. And yeah, the evaluation stage, it all went pretty smoothly. The only thing was that time shift, and the students really got frustrated about that because it said, this is overdue. Well, you can imagine the stress that caused. Oh my goodness. So that was not fun. And I have another slide about all of those things later. And then the feedback. So in terms of timing, every Thursday it was due. Yeah, if you want to flip, my survey responses are kind of in slide 44 or something, Kim, I think. Anyway, oh yeah, that is okay. Sorry, it did flip to there. So okay, so just so you know the timing before I get into that. So the timing was they submitted everything on the Thursday by midnight. That was fine. Then they had to have evaluations done by the Sunday, and then that turned out okay. And then they had the evaluation of their evaluation, which was due the very next day on the Monday. So they wrote a little evaluation of whether their peer evaluation was helpful or not, and in how it was helpful. Okay, so here are the survey responses from my one student too, like Kristen. I only had one respond, unfortunately, but it was, it's been an interesting couple of years. So during the feedback stage, how do you usually review the evaluations you received? I read them carefully, took notes. My grades, my peer. Okay, so the student said that again, like Kristen, the grades were slightly lower than the instructor. And like Kristen, I agree that that's not true at all. I had students who were at the beginning of term very upset about a couple of assignments I had given them, didn't think the marking was fair, thought that the workload was too much. And through the evaluations she received from her peers, it was really clear that it wasn't just me. So my favorite part of Kritik is that they get evaluated and they get clear and direct feedback from their peers. And because it was anonymous, I think the peer felt it was respectful, absolutely respectful feedback, but it was right on the mark. The people who evaluated hers. And I thought that was most helpful because I think that this student had to really think about the work she was submitting and what she was doing and think more critically about it. As Kristen was saying, again, this is all about more critical thinking. And she did end up improving because of that. Whereas I think she might have seen my opinion as more subjective and just not listen to it as much. So that's what I enjoyed. I also ended up marking the videos myself because it's new. It's a new tool and I didn't want to. Right. So I ended up, just going in there and I think I did give them a bit higher marks than what the peers gave them. In some cases, maybe not in others, but I think that's about it. Did I miss anything?
Okay, I think I'm going to go on to Curt, and then we'll come back. Okay.
Great.
Sure, Curt.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Kim, for organizing this. There's a lot of details to look at. So I tried it in a 2-month course I was teaching to teacher candidates who were just about to go out to their placements in schools, in local schools. These are after degree people. So they've all earned a degree and then they've almost reached 2 complete years after that in education. They'd also survived 2 of the most difficult years when it comes to education. So it was the best group I have ever had in terms of completing and meeting assignments and interacting. So there was some unique features about that. You can see at the bottom, gave them a Kritik warm-up exercise in the first week, just so everybody could walk through it and have a sense of it. It was 1 point, but they could create something, which was basically a hello, how are you? It would then be evaluated and then feedback would be given on the feedback. We also did a set learning challenge feedback. So they had to set learning challenges for their potential students. And that was a lesson plan along with some other things. So that creation would be uploaded, and then other students would say, you know, this lesson plan's meeting here, but not meeting here, according to the criteria provided. And then the final thing that I did was study skills short slide show feedback. And that was, like Martha's, a video presentation. So anonymity didn't really matter. And for my purposes, these are teacher candidates, the feedback that they're going to be giving in the future is almost primarily non-anonymous. I mean, you're going to know where the feedback's coming from. So I wanted them to have experience in doing that. Now, for my purposes, in another institution, I taught writing skills heavily and found it very useful to get student feedback on other students' writing. But I faced 2 problems. One was the logistical problems of getting everything in, then getting everything back out so that people could mark it. The logistical problem was one, and the second problem was to make sure that they were getting good advice. And so Kritik solved the logistics problem and also solves the is this good advice problem by kind of calibrating the students' feedback to my my feedback, and I appreciated that. You know, it took 2 big loads off of my hands and made me a lot more certain that they were getting good feedback. Let's go to the next slide. So you can see I used, as Kristen and Martha have, I used criteria. I started with what they offered and then I modified it. It was very easy to modify to match what I'm usually looking for when I'm doing it. This is just one example of it. Let's move to the next one, please. And then survey responses. We sent out the survey after they had already gone into teaching, so their heads are full of teaching day in and day out. But we did get 5 people who responded, and they found either strongly disagree, 20%, and 80% thought, agreed that it did help them learn the materials better. I was really trying to give them practice in evaluation. I became a better evaluator, so 80% agree, 20% strongly agree. And I thought this was important for teacher candidates to get used to it, to have some experiences in evaluating. I found that we were on the bubble when it came to agreement with the way I marked things. So some people marked a little higher, some people marked a little lower. Kritik also has the opportunity for people to protest their grades. And I had 2 people protest their grades. They just click a little box and say, I have an issue here. This particular piece of anonymous feedback, in both instances, they haven't followed the rubric. They're not really evaluating me. They're just sort of saying, yeah, I like it. So I want a better evaluation, please. And so that was easily resolved. And let's look at the last slide. So this is some of the verbal feedback that we had from the 5 criteria: clear and concise. Getting feedback from peers was something they liked. Getting the chance to practice evaluating, they found it easy to use. I liked seeing what other people had created. And I liked being able to share that. Everybody was able to see other people's videos, and that was good. What I didn't like, feedback on feedback. Well, welcome to teaching. I didn't dislike anything. The weight given to being close to what others would have given for marks. Okay, so I'm not sure why they didn't like that, but anyway. Conflicting notifications. Now there was very intensive notifications, and I'd make some changes, but I can talk about that in the last slide when we get back to it. And it was confusing having to hand it in on Kritik and Moodle, but we've got an answer for that because we're going to integrate Kritik and Moodle. So I think that's it for me, Kim.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, ladies and Curt. So then looking at my particular courses, and as Kristen had mentioned, I taught a 4th-year course, Philosophical Perspectives, in the fall, as well as the Introductory Communication course. I'm going to leave the Introductory Communication course to the last. I just didn't get the survey responses for the fall term, so I'm going to use the winter term course. So in any event, click here. So just what you have on the screen is the instructions that I provided to the students. And we were looking at ontology, epistemology, and differentiation between them. And I had got some thoughts about how I'm going to change already the process of where we're going this fall. But this was excellent opportunity as far as I'm concerned, because it gave them an opportunity over 5 sets of 2 weeks, so 10 weeks. So what I did with this course was I had 5 activities worth 15% each, and students had 2 weeks to complete the entire activity. So they had not quite a week to do the composition phase, but then they had the remainder of the time to go through the feedback evaluation phase, where they actually did the peer review of 4 to 5 assignments. And I'm going to tighten that up next time. I think maybe I'll give them 3 or 4, but not 5. Anyway, they had those activities to evaluate of their peers. And then they had 3 days to do the evaluation feedback, give the peers that had marked their papers feedback on how constructive their feedback was. So this was just the instructions. And the instructions changed, of course, from activity to activity, but my rubric remained the same for all assignments. So this is an example of my activity. And I'm saying that because in my intro course, the rubric changed through all 5 activities, because we were looking at different pieces of writing development. So in any event, this is looking at the assignment. I wanted to ensure that they covered all components necessary for developing and presenting a very well-rounded piece of work. So, and yet keep it within a confined 650 to 700 word requirement. And as the other folks have explained, there was the levels. Overall, this particular criteria was worth a weighting of 1. And then anything less than, so level 4 would be a full 1 out of 1. Anything that was less than 4 would be a portion of the 1, whether it be 75% or 0.75 or 0.25. I didn't put that in here because I thought it was a bit too wordy, and I'm more than welcome to talk with people who are interested later. So intro and conclusion, the topic understanding piece was another criteria that was worth 1. And this took me a lot of time because none of the critic rubric samples for what I was using for philosophical perspectives or the intro course met my needs. And so looking at the next criteria, integration of primary knowledge. Charlie, come here. Char. Writing style was another criteria. I'm just going to make sure I don't get too ahead of myself here. And a big one here, use of passive versus active voice. Some students didn't know what that was, so I went into some conversations about that. And then the last one was looking at grammar, syntax, and spelling. Now, I gave equal weighting to all these criteria, and I might look at changing that up a little bit different, but for last fall, because it was a real quick turnaround time to get this mounted, I just went ahead and gave everything a weighting of 1. And then down to and including APA format and style. So I'm just gonna not spend too much time on that. It's a lot of words, but suffice it to say, I will make some changes to make it more measurable, because at the end of the day, it needs to be measurable, or else the rubric is not worth any salt. So then in terms of my survey, I had, I think, 35 students and 6 responded. So when I'm looking at how the students felt about learning, the critic activities helped me learn materials better, there were 3 who agreed, and 1 who strongly agreed, and 2 who disagreed. I learned by reading through evaluations, the comments that were provided by my peers. I had 2 who strongly agreed, 2 agreed, and 1 who disagreed. Did I click too fast? I learned by evaluating my peers' submission. 2 strongly agreed, 2 agreed, and 1 disagreed. And then I tried my best to evaluate my peers as closely as I could to what my instructor would have. And 2 strongly agree, 4 agree. I became a better evaluator after a few activities. 2 strongly agreed, 3 agreed, and 1 disagreed. During the feedback stage, which was the final stage of critic, how do you usually review the evaluations you received? 1 said I briefly scan them. Another said I read each one. And another said I read each one very carefully. And 3 said I read them carefully and take notes. Pretty interesting. The grades my peers gave me were, I had 2 who said slightly higher than what my instructor would provide, 3 who said close to what my instructor would give, and 1 who said significantly lower. The grades I gave to my peers were 3 said slightly higher than what my prof would give, and 3 said close to what my instructor would give. The optimal number of peer evaluations to give, 3 thought that the magic number should be 3. 2 thought 4 should be assigned, and 1 thought that 5 should be assigned. What is one thing that you like most about critic? Being able to evaluate others helped me learn. Receiving feedback from more than 1 person. The help chat. Anonymity, seeing marks sooner. Time frame for creation, evaluation, and feedback due. Tell us one thing that you didn't like about critic. And I didn't like that it was slightly different. Sorry, I didn't like it that it was slightly difficult to see how many evaluations I had to grade the first time, as you had to pan over to see them. I felt I didn't have a great understanding of the material, and I felt I should not be marking others' assignments or giving feedback on content I didn't fully understand. Rating power, subjectivity, didn't like everything. This platform should only be used for education, becoming teachers, stream of universities. It so serves no other purpose to other faculties. Interesting. The uncertainty with individuals who are evaluating the papers. And we can talk about this in a bit. All right, if you have any additional comments, should be able to edit as if it were a Word document, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, and be able to use Indents change font. And you do have the capacity, but it's got a trade-off. And then non-applicable was included there. So then looking at my intro course, this was a sample of the instructions, and I was really looking for this particular course. And I've been teaching this course for a number of years, and I've struggled. I've used online forum discussions to actually try to develop improved writing skills. And I am just like so excited about using Kritik, because I'm now going to be making changes to my fall term based on what is my findings for here. But anyway, this is just a sample of the differences between the different types of nouns, and then we go into verbs as well in a little bit later. But just to give you an idea, I'm not going to run through this, but this is just a sample of the instructions. And then the rubric that goes along with this particular activity, again, it's got the levels, and you can adjust the levels of your criteria. If you just have a few criteria or few components within your criteria that you want to evaluate, you can have just a couple of levels that pertain to that criteria, or you can have more than 4 or 5. And looking at identification of pronouns, spelling, grammar, sentence structure was another, and they were all equally weighted for 1. And this particular group of students, I had, I think, 38, and I did 5 activities over the course, and they were given 2 weeks to, again, complete the activities. Now, when I'm saying that, there is one, because we started a week late, if you remember, in the winter term, I had to compress the 5th activity, and they were only allocated a week. So there was a quick turnaround time, but I felt a significant level of comfort that they've been through 4 activities already. And that 4th and 5th activity really were an opportunity for them to use the feedback at the 4th activity and integrate it into the 5th activity. So it was a redoing of the same activity, but different questions. And that, I think, was a better off. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to give them a couple of activities that build on each other. And we'll talk about that. I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. Quite excited about this, I am. So then looking at the responses. So there was only 3 students who responded. And of them, 2 strongly agreed that the Kritik activities helped that student learn materials better, and 1 strongly disagreed. Reading through the evaluations, I learned by reading the evaluations my peers provided. Strongly agree 2, and 1 strongly disagree. I learned by evaluating my peers' submissions. Again, 2 strongly agree, 1 strongly disagree. I tried my best to evaluate my peers as close as I could to what my instructor would have. 2 strongly agreed with 1 strongly disagreed. I became a better evaluator after a few iterations. 2 strongly agreed, 1 strongly disagreed. During the feedback stage of Kritik, how do you usually go over the evaluations? I briefly scan them as 1, and I read each one was another student, and I read each one very carefully was another student's response. The grades my peers gave me were slightly higher. 1 student said slightly higher than what my instructor would give, and 2 said that they were slightly lower than those that the instructor would give. The grades I gave my peers were close to that comment was made by 2 students, and slightly lower than was made by 1 student. And then looking at the qualitative comments, mention 1 thing you liked about Kritik, and this was again the intro course. I learned from both doing the assignment and evaluation feedback, super accessible as well. The notifications were something when something was due. I felt this platform was super helpful. It helped us, kept us engaged and well organized. It would send notifications if something was due that you had not submitted to make sure you did not forget. I looked forward to reading feedback from my peers and reading how they felt about feedback I gave them. I would highly recommend you continue to use this platform if possible. It was amazing. Mention one thing you didn't like about Kritik. There wasn't a specific mark you should give for the amount of errors made. You kind of had to guess on what Professor Ryan would give as a mark. Everything else, I didn't like anything, everything else. I'm struggling to find something I didn't. Okay, mentioned one thing. Another student said, I'm struggling to find something I did not like. I thought it was an awesome platform. If you have additional comments to help improve Kritik and its use in this course, please provide. So students should not need to do professors' work. That was the big one. Okay, so then looking at lessons learned. Kristen.
Thanks. So we've each taken some time to reflect on the lessons we've learned about using Kritik and through using Kritik. And here are a few of mine. The first time, or rather, aside from that one student who gave me feedback on Kritik's own survey, a number did offer feedback during our Zoom classes. I did give them some opportunities to talk about their use of Kritik, and several also referenced it on their course evaluations. So I'm integrating all of that into my own learning about using Kritik. One thing I discovered is that using it for all of the major written course activities, which I did the first time I used it, was not a popular option. My concern there was initially driven by the idea that students might not feel they got their money's worth. They pay a $24 subscription fee per term to use Kritik. But there was a real desire to get some of their substantial assessment and feedback directly from me, which I think is absolutely fair. And so the second time I taught this course using Kritik, I moved some of the previously Kritik-based assignments to my own and my TA's evaluation. I also found that it worked poorly for some types of activities. So for example, the first time around I had a film analysis with several questions where students really needed to evaluate each question separately. And Kritik is just not set up well for that type of activity. So with the evaluation setup I did use, I think was a little bit frustrating for students and for myself. So that type of activity would need to be really rethought in order to work with Kritik. I found that it was very important to be visible to students within Kritik. So even though I was regularly spot checking work, if I didn't comment on that work or adjust the students' grades myself, they didn't see that I was in the system. They didn't realize that I was reading their work and overseeing the peer assessment. So I made it a practice the second time around of commenting every time I spot checked the paper, and I would take a batch of them each week and spot check those and keep track of whose I was checking, so that each student, I think each student got 3 papers spot checked over the course of the term. And every time commenting, even if I thought the evaluations of their work was fine, even if I agreed with the comments, just saying that, just being present and visible for students. The most resistance I received to Kritik, interestingly, was from some of my strongest students, especially the one who said they're planning on going to med school. They didn't like the fact that Kritik's assessment system made it almost impossible to get 100% on an assignment. Now, they could get very close, but given the way that Kritik calculates marks, it would be very unusual to get a straight 100. And certain students did not like the fact that that was out of reach. I can sympathize. I discovered how crucial it was to have a very good rubric as well, where results always match expectations or routinely match expectations. I'm relatively new to using rubrics. I've tended to rely on a sort of more holistic grading system. And it's been so important here because, of course, you're not the one using the rubric, other people are. And so everything needs to be as clear as possible. Everything needs to work out in terms of translating into a final assignment grade that you would give, because you don't have that ability to kind of adjust as you go along the way you would if you were the one using the rubric. And it's a really difficult balancing act between the clarity, the usability of the rubric, providing enough detail. So I did go through and carefully revise my rubric between the two courses. Plagiarism is also a real issue here. I found that student evaluators simply weren't very good at detecting plagiarism, or if they did detect it, at bringing it to my attention, even though I requested that they do that. I'm told by critics that they're working on an integration with Turnitin. I don't think that would solve the particular issues that I have with academic dishonesty and students. So I think that there's really no way around really diligent spot checking, as well as keeping an eye on past offenders' subsequent submissions. It doesn't seem to be a really good way to replicate that for students who are doing the evaluations. So those are just some of my reflections on my experience. Martha?
There we go. So as I said before, I marked my assignments. I marked their assignments anyway, and mostly what I was looking at were their comments. Of course, the rubric is just numbers, and I was really got a lot out of it as an instructor to see who put the effort into the comments. So those who put the effort into the comments was really reflected in their final mark, which I had control over. So some of them really, I didn't like like Kristen was saying before, the strong students didn't get the feedback they deserved for the amount of work they put in. And then the weaker students might have gotten great feedback from the stronger students. And it was a little bit unequal in that regard. So I filled in that gap and just made the extra comments for those stronger students and bumped up their mark. And then for the students who didn't put the effort into the comments, I just suggested that again, I liked that we did the same activity, but 3 times so that there was a chance to improve, to get used to it, and so on. As I said before, it takes the blame off of me when somebody doesn't think the marking is fair, when you've got 3 people telling you the same thing about your work. I really like that. I just loved Kritik's support. I thought it was excellent. It was instantaneous when I had an issue. They were really good about encouraging the students to contact Kritik, not me, when they had a difficulty. So there's that help chat bar, button at the bottom right was what they were supposed to try first. And that was super, so that I didn't get bombarded with a bunch of technical questions or even regular questions. So that was just super. And then there was one piece where I really wanted to, I can't remember what it was, but I really wanted to check before I gave that final release where I released all their marks and I released all their feedback. There was not a chance for me to check that first. And I really wanted, before I pushed that final button where all their marks were released, I wanted to give it a once over, and there wasn't an opportunity to do that. So I contacted Kritik, and within like a month, maybe even less, yeah, it was probably about a month or 2, they fixed that. So they're really, really keen on fixing any issues that come up technologically or otherwise. They're really keen on making this work for everybody. And so I noticed that they acted on it. They just said, oh, thanks. They didn't just say, oh, thanks for your feedback. They acted on it and actually changed that button. So that was great. And then, yeah, the time zone problems were a bit of a nightmare setting that up. And that wouldn't be an issue for most people, I don't think so. That's it.
Okay. I would do these things differently. So I would help prepare the students in the first week for what the critic stages are and how the marks are calculated, because there's a whole algorithm that's going on in the background, and I give them examples. I would give them more examples of what useful feedback is. I was making some assumptions about, second year education students, and not everybody had gotten the kind of experience in giving feedback that I would have hoped. So I would give them more examples ahead of time. I would advise students that Kritik is going to tell you when things are due. And I made the mistake of setting something a little too tightly the first time, so everybody was getting nagged, even though the deadline wasn't quite there yet. So the nagging was good. As I was having conversations with the students, they were saying, yeah, we need that because we've got busy days, so we like to be reminded that something's happening. So I would keep that. Personally, I would like to be able to remove rating numbers entirely and focus on the actual feedback, so they don't get number focused or star focused and more on what the actual nature of the comments is, because I just think for the education students that would be more useful. I didn't mention in here, but I will mention as a last piece that in the syllabus, I described Kritik as a pilot for us for this course, as well as your marks will be informed. Kritik scores will inform your marks. They won't decide your marks. That gave me the out I needed to kind of have second thoughts and look at things, because I hadn't used it before. I would probably do that one more time before I felt, completely confident in saying, okay, for this segment of your mark, the Kritik score you have will determine it. But I think overall I had a positive experience. Kim.
Thank you. So with the exception of wanting to change the rating, I agree with Curt, and certainly my experience was a bit different in terms of my philosophical perspectives course. We had done one activity and I got an email from one person saying, hey, do you realize that we can check who the papers are that are we're grading? I'm like, what? Yeah, so they're very smart, these students of ours, and some actually know how to check into properties. Go figure. Anyway, so guys, anonymity is not guaranteed. If you actually have them upload a document that's been prepared in Word, PDF, they can still check the originating properties. And I want to look at how we can rectify that, because with a course such as philosophical perspectives, we want to have them complete a paper that actually adheres to APA format. Because how I got around this was I just got them to copy and paste their assignment up into Kritik, which created some bugaboos, because if they just copied and pasted their assignment into it and didn't go back and check it, sentence structure was all over. There was no paragraph breaks cleanly unless they went in and manually did that. So it became quite frustrating for the students at the activity 2, because then I needed to intercede and say, hey guys, this is what you need to do. So we were able to get around it, but I do want to actually see if we can rectify that, because whether it's me uploading their assignments and then it's from me, I'm not sure what to do about it, but I do really want to have them have the ability to have the proper formatting. The other ones, I found that students, right off the hop, I found students were giving full scores. And the beauty of using 5 assignments allocation is that you can check the variations in scoring allocation. And if there are 1 or full marks across the board, then you're not really all that concerned, or at least I wasn't. I had 35 to get through. So, but I would zero in on the ones that there was significant deviation right off the hop. And I go in, I see, okay, so-and-so and so-and-so was assigning full marks, when in fact there were flagrant errors that the student had made. And so then in my second activity, I went in and spoke to the students. I said, hey, I have the capability to adjust your marks, not only the marks that have been assigned by your peers, but also the marks that you're assessing. I'm going to assess your grading as well. And I will be adjusting your mark accordingly. If you've just gone in and given everybody full marks without actually doing due diligence, which is what it's really, the intent of Kritik is all about, is critical thinking and actually evaluating appropriately, then your mark will reflect that. And so by the third activity, they cleaned up their act. And so those are the lessons learned, that right from the outset, I will actually be addressing that at the beginning. And then lack of clarity. So then I need to really make it more clear on my explanation on how it is that the full marks are allocated. So that's my lessons learned. Anything else?
Wonderful. Well, if that's everything for the presenters, we're so appreciative of you sharing this research with us. I'm going to stop the recording now.